All right, good afternoon and welcome to our annual Meet the Mentors panel discussion. Looks like we are slowly joining the webinar, so thank you all for being here today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexandra Hickeltims, and I serve as the Assistant Director here at the Center for Public and Nonprofit Management. We are so excited to kick off our 2023 season by showcasing a few of our dynamic first-year mentors. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to begin by introducing our two phenomenal moderators for today, Brittany Broadus and Michele. And I'd like to begin with Brittany Broadus. Brittany is a transfer student in her junior year at Cleveland State University with an anticipated graduation date of spring 2024. Brittany will earn her bachelor's degree in organizational leadership with a concentration in business management. Brittany believes that you should never give up on your dreams, no matter the obstacles you're facing. Brittany is employed full-time with CVS Health as a customer care representative for Medicaid and Medicare members. She also serves in a leadership role at her local church. Brittany is looking forward to her future and is expected to continue her education to the graduate level. Thank you so much, Brittany, for being here today and putting all of this effort into moderating today's discussion. All right. I am also thrilled to bring to the screen Michele King. Michele is a master's level grad student studying environmental studies and nonprofit administration at Levin. This is also Michele's second year in the mentoring program, and we are so happy to have her back. She is also a Cleveland Foundation Public Service Fellow, working at Cleveland City Hall in the planning department, focusing on transportation policy research and formation. She has broad interests, but is particularly passionate about sustainable urban development and environmental policy and the role of land use decisions in social justice issues. With some of her spare time, she participates in community activism for the LGBTQ community and volunteers for various nonprofits that are focused on environmental stewardship and conservation. And Michele's mentor this year is actually one of our panelists, Kristin Hall. Again, thank you so much, Michele, and we are so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see all of you and all of you that we do not see in the audience. We're super thrilled to have you here. I just wanted to go ahead and give Rob and Alexandra a big thank you for inviting Brittany and I on. We're thrilled to be here and thrilled to have such fantastic panelists to be answering some of our questions and all of your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and do our first introduction. I'll be introducing our first panelist, David Baas. David Baas serves as the Assistant Director for Planning and Development at the City of Lakewood. He has been with the department since 2018, working across a variety of areas, including architectural review, transportation policy, zoning and land use analysis, and other community initiatives. Prior to joining the city, he retired from the Marine Corps as a lieutenant colonel with 20 years of applied leadership, planning, and project management experiences in a variety of organizations in the U.S. and abroad. His military experience spanned ground combat, strategy design, and deliberate crisis action planning for service, joint, and multinational forces. He holds an AICP certification and has earned a Master's of Urban Planning and Development, a Master's of Operational Studies, and a Bachelor of Science in History. Welcome, David. We're happy to have you here, and I'm going to turn it over to Brittany.
Thank you so much, Michele. Next on our panel today, you guys, we have Jim Rokakis. Jim Rokakis is a former vice president of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy and the founder of its Thriving Communities Institution. He is involved in a number of activities, including the establishment of 64 county land banks throughout Ohio and working in Columbus and Washington, D.C. to raise funds for Ohio communities to deal with distressed properties. Jim served for 19 years on the Cleveland City Council, the last 7 as a chairman of the financial community. In 1997, Jim took office as the Cuyahoga County Treasurer. Faced with the Cuyahoga mortgage foreclosure crisis, Jim worked with legislators to have and introduce and pass the House Bill of 294, with streamlining the foreclosure processes for bandit properties. In addition, Jim is the driving force behind the bill that is allowed for the creation of the Cuyahoga County Land Rejuvenation Corporation, known as the Cuyahoga Landbanks. Next, I'll pass it back over to Michele, and she's going to introduce our next mentor.
All right, for our final panelist, my personal mentor, I'm super excited that we're both on this panel today so I can introduce her. I'm going to be introducing Kristin Hall. Kristin is a dedicated and hardworking conservation professional with 15 years of experience in sustainability operations, management, project implementation, and policy development. Currently serving as Executive Director of Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District, Kristin helps direct district operations to implement programs and practices that protect and restore healthy soil and water resources in Cuyahoga County. Prior to her role at the Conservation District, Kristin served as Director of Sustainability for Cleveland's Mayor's Office of Sustainability. Kristin holds a bachelor's degree in biology from John Carroll University and a master's of science degree in environmental science from Cleveland State University. She is passionate about initiatives which connect people with nature and help achieve balance with natural systems, including tree canopy restoration, circular organic waste management, and green infrastructure. Welcome, Kristin.
So happy you guys, you got to hear about all our great panelists, and we are so excited for all three of you guys. Thank you so much for your time, for you guys to come out for today. Our first question for all three of you, we are going to start back up with Dave. So if you can start with the question, and then after that, you guys can just popcorn between yourselves. Our first question that we have for you as a whole, as we all know, the world has seen big changes in the employer and employee role with the Great Resignation movement. How do companies navigate the ripple effects of the pandemic, or just reevaluate how to retain talent? So Dave, we'll start with you first, and then after that, whoever would like to go next.
So thank you. Pleasure to be here. It's an interesting question. I'll put it, at least from my perspective here, working, in a municipality, more of like a public perspective on that. I think just one of the things that pops to the kind of fore of my mind is that it's kind of changed a lot of the ways and brought remote work options more into the mainstream. I think I feel like, prior to 2020 or earlier than that, kind of the remote work option might have been, a secondary option that was out there. Now it almost seems like it's a primary or a high expectation in a lot of ways. And, for a municipality, or other organizations that have, an obligation or inherently rely on or legally obligated to public and open processes and that kind of public access, it can make things challenging. And so, and we've been dealing with it and trying to, hire new people, retain talent, as expectations of different people kind of shift and change in terms of, I think it's just being flexible. So we've had to do some kind of balancing with our own workforce here and allowing kind of, I guess, part-time remote work during the week, 1 or 2 days a week where people are out, but you can't, like for our, in planning and development, we got people walking in the door that have questions on applications and everything. And so it's more of a management issue than in terms of just making sure that there's appropriate representation every day here. And then obviously it's challenging to work through public meetings and the public process, sunshine laws and all those things, and making sure that you're providing access, but still fulfilling the legal obligations. And the only other thing I can think of, I think as more people, their horizons have kind of been expanded in terms of the pandemic or post-pandemic in this, is that public sector, I think we've had to look a lot more in terms of you get what you pay for, in terms of pay and benefits has kind of come under kind of a narrower focus or a greater focus, I will say. And so we're trying to compete more. It's a difficult position, I guess, versus the private side, but we recognize that you need to be competitive in order to retain talent, as people have options to go other places and it might be easier. So all in there.
Thank you so much. Jim or Kristin, whoever would like.
Well, I'll take a swing at it. So when I was county treasurer, we had about 120 employees in the office. That was a long time ago. I became treasurer in 1997, but I think some of the rules are applicable today. And I think part of the issue is in the public sector, very often we found, and maybe you didn't see this, Dave, in Lakewood, but early on when I took office, most people in my office had a job because they knew somebody. In the world of politics, you'll often see people get hired not because of what they know, but because of who they know. And that was demoralizing to those who worked hard and to prove their value when they knew that the guy next to him was related to so-and-so, that ward leader, that ward healer. So one of the things we did early on, first of all, we did raise salaries right away. And then, but that came with the trade-off, and that is we raised the expectations. We did in-house training. And we had a process that I think was very inclusive. We brought people in for meetings. We really tried to engage people in the not so exciting job of maybe collecting property taxes, but it's an important job. And I have to tell you, there was some bloodletting. You know, there were a lot of people that left, didn't like the fact that they were being held accountable. They used to get away with a lot more under different circumstances. But I think in the long term, over time, we developed a really good core of people. They were responsible. They knew they were being rewarded. We even did merit pay. We did bonuses at year end. And I think what I'm trying to get at is I think you have to involve people in the process, find the talented people who really want to stay there, and involve them in the decision making. I think the public sector has its challenges, but you know, there's something there called a fixed pension benefit plan, which have gone the way of the dinosaur. The fact is, if you enter the public sector, you're not going to be maybe the highest paid person in your neighborhood, but you know that X number of years out, you've got a pension you can rely on. And it's hard for somebody who's 20, 25 or 30 to think about that. But trust me, it matters as an old guy who has a pension. Anyway, so I think that that's a big part of it. And I think that the interesting thing for people on this call is I think there are going to be some opportunities in city and county government for people who are willing to work hard and prove their worth. And I hope people take advantage of it.
And I'll just build off of that. I think Jim kind of hit the nail on the head with some of the points I was going to make around this, building off of what Dave said as well. The public sector, I think in the public sector, and I'm going to speak specifically in the conservation field, we're not always in it for immediate returns. We're not in it, we're in it for the long game. We're not going to get immediate satisfaction. And the same is true with some of the public sector benefits. So I don't think I really appreciated when I first joined the city of Cleveland what it meant to be part of that Ohio pension program and be a part of OPERS. And I didn't even really realize just how much I appreciated it until I was ready to start looking for other roles. And found that I had 11 years of service time already put in at the city that then carries with you to other public sector roles. So now I'm 11 years closer to retirement than if I had gone to the private sector. Now, again, we talked about some of those trade-offs. One of the things I'm facing now is my newer employees, they only earn 2 weeks of vacation time every year. I'm competing with the private sector, and you have to earn it as you go. The private sector, you get 3 weeks right away, plus all this flexible time and remote work and all these other fun benefits and employee picnics and whatnot. I cannot provide that. We don't have the resources or the capacity, but all I can do is provide a great working environment and try to instill, especially in some of those younger employees, what it means to actually stick around. I've got an employee who's been with us for 15 years and he earns 5 weeks vacation. He even earns vacation while he is taking his vacations. So, I try to point him out to some of those younger folks. I'm like, you got to stick with it. It's worth putting in some of that time and it pays off in the long run.
Thank you all so much for answering that question. I'm going to jump into the second question. This one's going to also be a group question. So Dave, I will start off with you again. Lucky you, you get to be first through all of these questions. And then, whoever wants to go after Dave, feel free to jump in. So my question is, all of you have incredibly diverse backgrounds that have required many different critical steps to get you to the positions that you're in today. So reflecting on those moments in your career histories, what are some of the vital steps that you would recommend a student or a young professional take to prepare them for a role like yours?
Okay, where do I start? Holy smokes. So maybe I'll think about like internally and externally as a couple things and notes that I think I took down this. I think one of the things that, I guess I'm trying to put myself, go back to my student or kind of that recent graduate thing. You need to know who you are and kind of seek that continual improvement on yourself. Now, this goes into a couple of areas and I know we're going to talk about professional development, I think, in a little bit. You got to know your strengths and weaknesses. That's always been something for me that, and sometimes you're not going to be able to overcome, weaknesses and just the way that you are as a person. But in terms of, being a good follower, being a good member of a team, seeking leadership and responsibility. I'm trying to think those things, it's critical that you know who you are and what you're good at, maybe some of your weak points, so that when you are part of an organization or part of a team, you can lean on team members, things that you have to work on and develop yourself on. I think those are that's always been kind of a continuous theme throughout, my previous career, this career that I just started a couple of years ago. Again, externally, I think looking out, away from yourself is that it's just, it's very, very important. And I learned this, I think, from an early age. And then I learned it all over again when my family and I moved here to Cleveland. And that's, you've got to work really hard, regardless of your personality, introvert, extrovert. You got to work on building your network. And so the career in the military, it kind of happens intuitively often, just in terms of your assignments and things that you build your network kind of incrementally over time. Both my wife and I, when we were moving here, we worked really hard on building a network kind of in advance of actually moving here. And then it's something that you just constantly work on, kind of expanding, who works where. And that's just, it's been extremely important to kind of get to know your peers, learn from them, find mentors and people that you can rely on and bounce things off of. That's been just a continual kind of key, like a vital step, I guess. I don't think in 20 years in the military, I ever was given an option in terms of where I was assigned. I was told by somebody that I knew that, hey, we're sending you here. And that was not a product. Oftentimes you do get kind of a slate of options in terms of where you want to get assigned. But I was very lucky that I always had somebody that I knew that was looking out for me and kind of pushing me in the general directions. And I think generally it's translated here in terms of my experience since joining the city of Lakewood. I've had people that have looked out for me, I've proven my value, they know my value, and they kind of, those mentors and those people kind of help shepherd you along. And so there's an internal and an external component of that. Hopefully that made sense, but that's what I would offer.
That was a great answer, Dave. I'll be a little simpler. Just find out what excites you, find out what you really are passionate about, and then go for it. I've been very, very lucky. I was very passionate about my neighborhood. I grew up on the near west side of Cleveland, off of West 25th near Denison Avenue, loved politics. And at a very young age, I was 22, I got elected to Cleveland City Council, what I would describe, honestly, as a fluke election, but that was okay. I worked hard, I was passionate, and I have followed my passion throughout my government career. I was thinking the other day about the fact that I just saw the mayor speak out on trying to do something to deal with smoking in Cleveland, that the smoking rate in Cleveland is twice the national average. Well, I was the guy back in 1985 introduced one of the strongest no smoking bills in the country. And why did I do it? Because my mother was dying and I took her to Metro Hospital numerous times, dying from lung disease, no less. And we'd enter a room filled with smoke. And when I tried to get somebody to stop smoking one time in one of the waiting rooms, he threatened to kill me. And I thought, this is insane. Here we are in a place where people go because they're sick, a hospital, right? And they're smoking. And we know it's bad for your health. So I became passionate about that. It took a year and a half. Fortunately, we got the tobacco industry to spend over $1 million in lobbying, and they lost. We passed the bill. But my point is, I found something I really cared about. I was passionate and I pursued it. So it was politics, it was issues within politics, foreclosures came later. Find out what you're passionate about, become a subject matter expert in what it is you care about. And you have to get involved. You can't do it from the sidelines. Don't do it right away. Make sure you're comfortable, but you have to get involved.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, Dave and Jim kind of took some of mine, but I will just maybe elaborate on a couple of those. Build your network was a huge one. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for just some connections that I had with folks. And I encourage all of you, look for opportunities to have informational interviews. Again, I would not have gotten the job at the city of Cleveland had I not had an informational interview with someone. And then when I went to follow up about an internship, there was a job available and they knew who I was, and it helped get my foot in the door more so than had I just blindly, sent my resume out. I think talking about who you are, what you're passionate about, that's huge. I don't think I realized until a little bit later on in life how important a physical component to work is. We live in such a digital world. We spend so much time on the computer. It wasn't until I was a few years in that I was like, man, I used to be a server and a bartender as well. And I remember going like, man, I just miss getting ice. And anybody who's served before knows what I mean. Just that, like, you're moving around, you're doing stuff. When you for me, when I leave the office, and all I've done is sit and type at a computer all day. And I'm like, God, I leave, it's 5 p.m. I'm so exhausted. And then I look at my Fitbit and I'm like, I've got 2,000 steps for the day, but I'm exhausted. It really showed me that a physical component of work is huge. And I tell people all the time how much I love working at Soil and Water, because I have so many more opportunities to get out there and do things with my hands, get dirty, get 10,000 steps in a day. So those are huge. Know what's important to you. Maybe that's not for you. Maybe you love being inside, computers are your jam. That's great. You just have to know yourself and know what's important, because if you take a job just because you think it's sort of what you want to do, you may find that those components aren't going to be there. The final piece I'll add, especially with some of you being newer, getting into into your careers, is don't shy away from maybe some of the tough work or difficult conversations. Early in my career, I was in more of an operations and HR role where I was hiring and firing people at the age of 24. So, Jim, like you said, you're doing things at a very young age. At the time, it was so stressful. I remember just feeling, so who wants to fire somebody? That's got to be tough. But, now looking back on that more than a decade later, any difficult conversations I have to have here with my staff are that much easier, because I know I've already probably done something harder in the past, and I just need to pull on some of that for the stuff I got to deal with now. So those are my top ones. Thanks.
All fantastic answers. Thank you all for answering that question. So at this time, we are going to jump into mentor specific questions. And I just wanted to remind everyone that we will be doing a Q&A right around 5:30. So feel free to start thinking about those questions, start jotting them down so that we can get to them after a couple of specific questions for our mentors. So again, I'm going to start with you, David. My first question for you is going to be, as someone that has relatively quickly climbed their way up to their current role, from an intern to a city planner to a senior planner, and now to an assistant director, what advice can you give to students and young professionals about professional development? And what tools do you use in your roles to prepare yourself for higher roles? So I know you spoke a little bit to, what steps it took you to get into your roles, but as far as, professional development, what can you say for that?
So sorry, my boss, this is again, going back into the dangers of a remote meeting is like, no, I do want, there's two things to preface that. So I want to reiterate what Jim said earlier about, in terms of like professional development and finding something that you're passionate about, I think is important. because my experience is a little different. I will say that, you know, going from an intern to a city planner and a senior planner and an assistant director of a department, you know, in the span of 4 years is probably not normal. But I will throw it out there that I am 47 and I've had my prior career. I spent, you know, more than a decade in and amongst other assignments doing operational planning. And so, yeah, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about kind of those general skills and stuff like that later on, but just that in experience alone kind of I think is not, it might be unique or whatever in terms of that, my rapid ascension. I probably owe more to that and like networking and things that we've talked about in the past, but I, you know, I found myself here after a 20-year career in military because the planning was something I was passionate about. To go back to like what Jim said, so I kind of found myself here, and public service also, just to kind of bounce off that for a second, is that it's, you know, just because you're passionate about it doesn't mean that you're going to enjoy every single day of work. And it's usually you're passionate about it, you know, and I guess this is my perspective on, you know, operational planning and some of the and those environments that I worked in was not easy. It was not enjoyable by any means. It was a day in, day out grind. But you know, but being passionate about that and kind of the value in that, and the value that I've found in kind of continued public service and working for a municipality is that, you know, the issues and kind of the things that you work with and the problems that you work with every day, they matter to real people. Like it's their problems that someone has a problem. It's someone that you can physically see and talk to, and you're working to solve that problem. I don't feel like you get that, you know, everywhere and in every job and even on different levels that you're so far removed from a population or someone that you serve, that's an important aspect that kind of drew me into this and kind of continues to drive me, you know, each day. Even though it is, I'm passionate about it, but man, there's tough days, more tough days than there are easy days, I can tell you that. But so I think to get back to the question, the advice, you know, for folks about professional development, there's just 3 things that I think I'll offer to you. And this is something that, you know, over the last, you know, 25 years in 2 different careers, especially if you were, you know, like a student or a young professional and was just graduated, and that the constant question of, you know, experience, where do I get experience? So in terms of professional development, you have to read as much as you can. And this is where being passionate about something helps, because you've got to find it interesting. But the predominant, you know, value in reading and being an avid reader is that you need to leverage the experience and, you know, the mistakes that others have made to your own benefit. You probably heard this before, and you know, this is not rocket scientist here, but reading through, you know, the ways that, you know, in my case, that different cities have handled development of bike infrastructure or the development of parking regulations or things like that. Like that is something that you can, you know, in the span of a couple hours or a weekend or a week or whatever of research and reading different sources and different perspectives on things, that it develops your own inherent ability to recognize and read situations, kind of why things are happening. And really at the end of the day, that experience that you're internalizing through other people's experiences and their mistakes, you really want to hone in on decisions and the decisions that have been made, why they've been made, because that starts to hone, you know, in the absence of your own experience, it starts to develop your own kind of gut feeling. When people talk about make a, you know, a gut decision on things, you've got to have something that's based on. And if it's based on other people's experiences that you've read about, that's better than nothing. And so that's one thing that it's been just literally jammed into my head since I was a young second lieutenant, is you have to read, you have to be an avid reader on everything that involves your professional career, your development. We were always taught, I guess, you know, before you go into a fight, or about, you know, that you should experience that 10,000 times in your mind before you actually, you know, go into a conflict or an engagement or something. You should work through different scenarios and ambushes and direct fire, you know, and different types of plans. You work that through in your head, you fight it out in tactical decision games and things before you ever go in the real world and kind of stumble into something like that, so that you have that experience of going through it over and over and over again in a training sense. So outside of reading, the second thing I, you know, and you probably heard this before, is that you've got to be a critical thinker. And people have to practice what I call healthy skepticism. And that's not being a, you know, well, I'll say a contrarian, or, you know, somebody that's, it's more than that, where, you know, contrarian just kind of questions popular opinion on things. It's really, you know, it's approaching it, looking at any information source, and especially, you know, experts, proclaimed experts, with caution. You know, where is this information coming from? What are the sources? What are the potential sources of bias? Seeking a broad perspective on issues. I'm not a fan of the term expert, and this is just my own personal opinion, because it kind of inherently implies that it's static. Like, you're an expert, you're comprehensive, you can't, you know, you've learned all there is to learn. You can always learn more. There is always things developing. And so if somebody is fluid and they're always approaching that, you know, that seeking continual improvement, that's of high value to me. And I feel like that. And so critical thinking is extremely important. It's in a planning sense, it's what you get paid for. And then the last thing that I'll say is just actively seeking out, you know, there's tons of outside opportunities for professional development, whether it's leadership, management, occupational field skills. If you're in real estate and planning, AICP, like APA, there's so many things out there, and it's not certification based, but continuing education, all those types of things. If you're not involved in that, you're missing out. And that goes back to that kind of, are you static or are you fluid in terms of your continual taking on board of information, you know, critically thinking about it and questioning that information, and just continuing to develop yourself. And so I'll stop there. I've talked enough. So.
No, everything that you said was excellent. So you definitely never are talking enough. We appreciate all your words of wisdom of how to be better at professional development. Next, we're going to move on to Jim. Jim, our question for you will be, as being such a leader in building and developing in Ohio, what are the key differences that students should look out for when deciding between private, public, and nonprofit sectors?
Well, I saw the question in terms of what career paths people are looking for. Okay. First off, Dave, I have to tell you, I really enjoyed your answer. And when you used the word ambush, all I can tell you is I got ambushed a lot at Cleveland City Council, and I never understood why or how, but I went through many exercises. It didn't work out for me. But anyway, so, you know, in government, in my various roles, I've always had to deal with the three sectors, right? In the public and the private sector, typically, people are motivated by a profit motive. Now, sometimes they would come in and they would try to say, no, this isn't about profit, it's really about what's good for your community. But at the end of the day, they really want to make money, and you have to understand that. Now, ideally in the public sector, whoever that is, public officials are working in the public benefit. So that should be easy, right? They're on your side. They're working on behalf of the public. That's not always the case either. I'm not going to say that because people were dishonest or didn't really care about the public, but what people think is good for the public sometimes differs from public official to public official, and that picture can get very fuzzy. And getting back to the ambush factor, Dave, it can often be illogical. So you have to be prepared to deal with situations that are hard to grasp. And then in the nonprofit sector, generally they do what's right for their constituency. But the difficulty I had over the years dealing with the nonprofit sector is they were often so passionate about their cause, so strident, they set guardrails or parameters in place that made it difficult for you to get to where they wanted to be. Because if you take a position that's hard this way, you can't bring people over and you can't gain consensus. And the other thing, I'm going to say this, and I know I'm going to tick people off by saying this, but I used to joke that we always called the CDCs in town the CDC industrial complex. And we said that because what we often learned was that they wanted to do what's right for their community, but you have to understand they have to make money, right, to keep those staffs going. And they often make decisions, I think, that not often, but sometimes it are better for the CDC than the community. Sometimes I know they're going to be out there, and I'm going to probably get calls tomorrow. Don't be offended. I just think you have to be able to look at the various groups. The one thing we were able to do between the three sectors is we've been able to pass a lot of bills in Columbus. For example, the Landbank bill. And we did that by convincing the private sector, namely banks, that you don't really want to deal with all those vacant and abandoned properties that you helped to cause, do you? And we said, no. So they brought their lobbyists to play. And then we went to the public sector and said, this bill is great because it's going to give you a tool to deal with all these vacant and abandoned properties. And of course, the nonprofits were spectacular in this effort. They really did so much to make the bill work. So if you can't, try to align all their interests. I don't know if that answers your question, Brittany, but there it is.
I think it does very well. Thank you.
All right, and now my question for Kristin, my first question for you is, as someone who served many years as a leader in city government, what is one piece of advice that you would give students that are looking to get involved and be successful in local government? And is there anything that you wish that you knew prior to entering the field?
Oh, yeah. So I guess first, I'll maybe just quickly back up. I realize I forgot to include it in my bio, but prior to coming to the city, I worked for a small marketing company. We were just under 20 people. And as I referenced before, I had an HR and operations role. So I had a direct connection to the president of the company. I had a company credit card because I was often buying materials and supplies. So if we needed something, I generally just would go out and buy it. And then I came to the city of Cleveland and had the biggest culture shock, one of the biggest culture shocks of my life, coming from a small private company of 20 less people to the beast that is city of Cleveland of 8,000 plus employees with more bureaucracy than you can shake a stick at, was tough. I think the biggest thing I would note, and I think for anybody that is working in this region and working with municipalities, it's important to remember that these are big systems and institutions. So while you may have one champion that you're working with, they may still have 3 directors or commissioners or chiefs that they have to report to get buy-in for whatever thing that you're trying to do. One of the things that, and even if you get support all the way up, you still have a whole city council that could squash your idea right from the get-go. So I think that's one of the big pieces. We talked about it before of kind of building your network. That is humongous in, I mean, really in any role, because it's one thing to find a job, but I think all of us, I imagine you're here because you want to be successful in the job that you're doing. And I have found that the more contacts you have, the more folks are familiar with who you are and what you do. As Dave referenced before, they know what your value is. When you're picking up the phone to call them, they're not like, oh, it's Kristin again, and they're conveniently busy or in a meeting. They're like, oh, it's Kristin. She's probably calling me about something that is important. I need to talk about it. You had asked about what advice I would give or what I wish I knew. I wish I would have known a lot about the kind of rules and procedures and processes and timeline. And Michele, I may even put you on the spot because I know you are getting exposed to some of that, or maybe not in your role, but I also came into the city as an intern with a lot of great ideas and ambition and energy of how we're going to change our city. And then the city reminded me how much they are not in the mood to change a whole lot. And I say the city as a whole. It's not specific individuals. Were people in departments that really wanted to see change. However, the system, you are working in a system. And as somebody once told me, systems are not meant to move quickly, move or change quickly. You know, the Titanic was not designed to turn on a dime. And as a result, we know what happened there. So those are things that I think would have been really helpful. It was probably not until I was about 5 years in that I felt I really knew what the heck I was doing. And when it comes to actually, I think all of our roles for the three of us that are here, we're trying to get stuff done. We're not just trying to be like a cog in the machine. And as a result of that, it took me a really long time. I had to learn, kind of trial by fire of how all of those processes worked. And I'll just give a quick example, and this might bleed into that second question you had, Michele, so sorry. But a lot of our work at the Office of Sustainability was funded through grants. We had a very small operating budget, so any projects we wanted to do, we had to go get grants. Well, that's great. There's lots of grants and lots of money out there for municipalities. I found myself getting a grant and then getting hit in the face with all of the city's bureaucracy of how we accept the grant, how we set the grant up in our financial system. Do I need city council approval to even accept and spend this money? And then we go through the whole procurement process. So I mentioned that culture shock before. I went from being able to just buy stuff when I need it to then needing 8 signatures before I buy stuff. And you'd think in 2023 stuff would move a little bit faster, but we are also managing the public's money. So there are checks and balances to make sure that we're doing that the right way. I know that's a lot, and I hope I am not scaring anyone off from the public sector when I share some of this, but I know that some of that stuff would have been helpful for me to at least help channel some of that energy and ambition that I brought when I first started. Because I found after I then was, serving in leadership roles and had interns under me, we'd be talking and they'd be like, well, why isn't the city doing this thing? Oh, wouldn't this be a great idea if the city did this? And I'd be like, yeah, that project's been on my list for the last 7 years. And I have not been able to make headway because we don't have the political will up the chain. And I think just helping to understand what those expectations are is another piece I would have loved to have known right from the get-go.
Fantastic answer, Kristin. Yes, that's something that I'm definitely figuring out and learning in my role now, and something that I definitely noticed just working among so many people that are either new to the public sector or have been in the public sector for a long time, is that all of those, learning those processes and, being patient, all of it is worth it for people that work in the public sector, because people that work in the public sector genuinely want to serve the public. So I don't think that it is something that should scare anybody away. If you're in, your field right now, like, because you have the passion for it, then you're in the right place, because that's going to drive you through. So this is actually a good segue into my next question. We are doing really good on time, so I'm going to continue with a couple of the mentor specific questions. And again, I'm going to start with you, Dave, but I feel like anyone could probably answer this question. So if everyone wants to take a stab at it after, that's perfectly fine too. So David, my question for you is, like I said, one of the things that I've learned since working in the public sector is that there's so much to accomplish, there's so much to do. And when you're a passionate public servant, and it can be really difficult to set boundaries and not take on more than you can chew, not take your work home. So how do you manage a work-life balance, if you do, when there are so many important problems to solve and not enough resources or time?
So there's a couple of ways that I will say that. So we've, let me think through. I'll answer this. And the first thing is in terms of managing that list, because that is, and it's not always, especially even the level that I'm at now, and oftentimes, when you're entry level or even a couple steps above that, you don't necessarily have the power or the influence to change or alter that list of things that continues to get added. And it's, I think as Kristin and Jim have both kind of referenced, there's so many different sources, especially in a public municipality, of the things get added to that list from council on the mayor's priorities and, resident emergencies and things that pop in there. And so that's really, when you start talking about responsibility and leadership and being, at the higher levels of there has to be some recognition. And I suffered from this once, about 15 years ago when I was a planner in the military. My boss at the time, who was our operations director, literally sat our larger boss, is a 2-star general down, and gave him a list of all the things that we had been asked in the last 3 to 6 months to do. And he literally had that kind of that moral courage and the ability to go to his direct superior and say, these are the things that you have asked us to do. Where can I draw the red line? because we can only get about 10 of these things done. And so a lot of times, you know, at your level, you will have that a more realistic focus on your available time and what you can handle. But ultimately, you know, the powers that be, when your organization, whether it's an executive director or the mayor or council or whoever, they owe it to you to provide that, you know, that guidance, that, you know, realistic prioritization of things. Sometimes they will, sometimes they can't. But that, you know, just realize that sometimes it takes a little bit of courage to kind of sometimes go back up the chain and say, hey, I can only do 10 of these things. What 10 do you want me to focus on? You may or may not be in that situation. I find myself in that situation once, and I still suffer from it here, but kind of with that experience, I now know that, you know, sometimes I will push back a little bit on that and say, you know, especially for our department as a whole, these are the things that we can do. But in terms of work-life balance, it has been something that it has taken a long time to develop that. You know, and I have a family, I have 4 kids. There's a ton of stuff that, and what I'll tell you, just from Jump Street, I build it into my calendar, and we use Outlook like a lot of organizations do, that they're all shared calendars so everybody can see your calendar. I am not hesitant at all at building in personal and family things into my calendar. Now, that comes with, you know, kind of the understanding with my boss that, you know, at the end of the day, I still get everything that I need to get done in terms of what's the priority and all those types of things. But some bosses may allow you to do that. I understand some may not. But sometimes you kind of have to prove yourself that you can balance it all. But it's very important to kind of get that built in there as one of your priorities, especially over the long term. You got to take care of yourself and take care of your family. I've kind of, that's been ingrained in me for a long time, physical fitness, all those types of things. So I do take a conscious break at lunch almost every day when I can. Sometimes I'll push it off to the end of the day, but it's in my calendar to go work out. I usually go run or do something, but you get away from the office, usually at that midpoint in the day when most people take lunch. It's kind of a low point, but you need to kind of physically separate yourself from the office. And then I do try to make as much time as I can for my family. And again, like, I build that into the calendar. That what I'll leave you with is, you know, 20 years in the military, I saw so many people, and I still see them here, people get divorced in terms of their prioritization of their career versus their family, you know. And I was always told that at some point, the Marine Corps or whatever, or the organization you work for, they'll be done with you. Hopefully your family's going to be there on the back end of that. And so it is important to prioritize kind of from the beginning and try to balance that out. So
I appreciate that. I think that was definitely a great way of saying that. I know in the newer generation, sometimes it's more less work and more your own quality time. So I think that it was good to say that, just creating a schedule where you have work and you're still thinking about yourself. So I love that. And it's good to hear that you have 4 children. That's a big family. We're going to go back to Jim. Jim, I did not get to mention this in your bio, but I do know a fun fact about you, that you were on 60 Minutes. I think that is very cool. And one thing
That, you know what, that and $1.50 gets me a coffee at Starbucks, but a small cup, right?
That is a pretty good thing. If I had that, I would definitely use that walking around everywhere.
Andy Warhol said everybody gets 15 minutes once in their life. I got 19, but trust me, it passes pretty quick. Anyway, all right.
Well, finding out that fun fact about you, and then hearing how originally you weren't working with foreclosures, you said in the beginning of your statement, you actually work with smoking, and you work with a policy about that, and it was the passion from being somewhere because of your mother. So what I really want to know, and our question for you is, where does your passion or heartbeat come from for fighting for Ohio communities? And conclusion to that question would also be, how can students and future leaders help the state of Ohio, especially the city of Cleveland, just stay revitalized?
So look, I didn't have a passion for foreclosures, right? I mean, it found me. I was collecting property taxes and discovered early on in my tenure, by 2001, 2002, something was very, very wrong in Cuyahoga County, something very wrong in the country, there were foreclosures coming in at a really, really fast rate. And in the book we wrote about land banks, I talk about a meeting I had with then Housing Court Judge Ray Pianca. I went over and said, what the hell's going on? Seems like every other property is being foreclosed on the east side of Cleveland, and like a cancer, it's spread. So again, that wasn't something I sought. It really found me. But what I did do is I immediately engaged in trying to find solutions. And I learned then that a local county treasurer in a place like Cleveland doesn't have a lot of clout when it comes to taking on the banking industry. And we were some of the earliest people to complain about what was going on, warn that there were dangerous consequences. We went to the Federal Reserve Bank. We tried to meet Alan Greenspan, talk about a fool's mission. He didn't meet with him, by the way. So the long story short is, it was I'll use the war metaphor, Dave. It was a war, and we learned early on we had lost the battle. And for us, we were then left with the task of burying the dead. And the dead for us was the tens of thousands of properties that had been abandoned, right? So it led to this land bank idea that we wrote here in Cuyahoga County back in 2007, 2008, passed the bill in 2008. And I can't take credit for how effective it's been. We thought it would be effective, but we couldn't predict it. But it was so effective, other counties around the state began to come to us, to come to me and say, would you help us get one started here? So my passion developed slowly, and I came to really appreciate people from around the state. I'd never been to Shelby County. I'd never been to Jackson County or Monroe or Washington or Scioto or all these other counties that I became familiar with. And I learned that we had a lot in common. We used to say blight unites, right? I mean, that we had money for police and for fire and for economic development and all these various functions of government. But we had this horrific problem. We had all these vacant properties, these blighted properties, these old factories, these warehouses, these homes, main streets in the cities falling apart. And it's over time I became passionate. It didn't happen. It kind of just organic. And then I began to really care for these folks. And to this day, I still talk to them. Today, we're following a demolition of an old hospital in Warren, Ohio, and St. Joe's Hospital on the northwest side, and a big factory complex called Wagner Manufacturing in Sydney, Ohio, which, in case you're wondering, that's in Shelby County. You have to go to the map. It's down Columbus, make a right and go about 3 counties to the west. Anyway, so it happened over time, and I really developed, and by the way, there's some great books out there about places in Southern Ohio that are struggling with the opioid crisis and some of the issues that have been especially acute there. So that's really where the passion developed, and I can't say it developed organically, really.
Thank you for that answer, Jim. Yeah, I feel like the more and more people that I have conversations with, specifically in the public sector, about just their career trajectory and where they started, more often than not, people fell into their roles and fell into their passions. It wasn't necessarily something that they were like, this is exactly what I want to do. You just kind of find things along the way that you're passionate about and see where it takes you. So yeah, thank you for answering that. So we do still have a little bit of time. I'm going to ask one more mentor specific question to Kristin, and then we are going to jump into audience Q&A in about 5 minutes. So please feel free to start dropping those questions in the Q&A chat so that we can have some questions to ask our mentors after this question. So Kristin, my question for you is pretty short. What are some personal accomplishments of yours that you think set you apart in the industry?
And that was probably one of the tougher ones for me, Michele, because I think as much as, I can list some of these, I have to maybe first state that all of these were collaborative efforts. A lot of the things that I hang my hat on in my career were not things that I did alone. Maybe I had the idea, maybe I was the one that kind of drove it past the finish line or had the institutional knowledge of how to operationalize it at the city because I knew all of the procedures, again, after a certain number of years. So, I had referenced before the kind of grant management. I think that for me has led to all of the projects that I've done at the city, the majority of them were grant funded. So the ability to find, secure, and then ultimately manage funding is huge. And I say that to anyone who's considering the public or nonprofit sectors. Those are, you may have healthy budgets, but sometimes there are going to be funders and dollars that have to be managed in a certain way. And knowing how to navigate that is one of the key roles for any of the work in these fields. A couple other items just that, I'm particularly proud of. Our annual summits for Sustainable Cleveland were one of the big things that while we didn't always look forward to it every year, because it was a 500 to 600 person event that we were planning and was often a very big undertaking. It was such a great way to bring so many members of the community together. And again, I referenced that network. It was because of some of those summits that I have so many folks now that I know if I needed to pick up the phone and get some stuff done, I've got at least, 10 or 15 people that would be happy to jump on that stuff for me, and vice versa. I would do the same for them because we have those established relationships. And I think some of it extends outside of just individual roles as well. So there are people that I have known for many years that have moved to other organizations, and they are even more valuable partner for me in their new role with whatever they're able to do. So that's one of the big ones. The Cleveland Climate Action Plan, which I believe they're in the process of updating as well, was another big one. Because I think that really gave me great exposure to all of the different levels of sustainability. And that paired with my experience in the city, it just helped me learn really well kind of how to get things done. And, even now transitioning to the county where we obviously operate a little bit differently, but I'm still finding I can tap into a lot of those skill sets and things that I've learned or lessons learned from the past to help me make sure stuff gets done in my new role.
Thank you so much, Kristin. That was excellent. We just want to thank all three of you for your answers to everything, just really giving us true insight about how to get this journey started. A couple of things that I definitely heard that was key from all of you were truly just know who you are, find that passion, keep that up, and don't forget that part. So we really appreciate you guys giving us that insight. We are going to now open this up for audience questions. I did already get one great question from someone, so we're going to ask that question. And this question does go right to Jim directly. Jim, Roger is asking, how did you develop unity across Cuyahoga County for the land banks? The politics of Seven Hills may differ from Westlake, Lakewood, and Cleveland, and Shaker, so on for on. This just question relates to statewide support as well.
Well, first of all, the answer to that was slowly, methodically. We met with every school superintendent, every treasurer, because the way land banks are funded required that each of the taxing subdivisions gave up some of their delinquent tax penalty money. And basically we did it by convincing them in many, many meetings that a rising tide raises all ships. We tried to explain that if they thought what happened in Cleveland wouldn't affect what happened to Lakewood, or couldn't impact Lakewood, if they thought what was happening in East Cleveland wouldn't impact Richmond Heights or Maple Heights or Garfield Heights, everything going on in the city would impact the entire region. So our feeling was, and we were able to make the case by showing different studies around property values and the impact on vacant and abandoned properties. And it's interesting, the most vociferous opposition came from a suburb that was giving up $7,000 a year. I mean, they wanted to go to war. $7,000. They wanted to stop the land bank. I don't want to tell you what it is, but it rhymes with Bay Village. So anyway, and I was stunned. It's like, really? You're going to stop a land bank because you're giving up $7,000 a year? Anyway, so that's how we did it. And it was slow, and but it was worth it. And we have to do that depending on the county and who. Typically, the largest donors to a land bank by giving up delinquent tax penalty money is the largest taxing subdivision within a county. So in Erie County, it was Sandusky. In Richland County, it was the Mansfield schools. So typically, you have to work with the school district, the largest school district, whether it's a city or a consolidated school district within a county. It's a process.
Thank you.
Am I allowed to jump in and build on that?
Go for it. Yeah.
I only because I am now in my new role working with all 53 communities across Cuyahoga County. I think you have to really get to know, as Dave was referencing, you gotta plan these different scenarios, you gotta do your research and do your reading, know who you're working with and what their priorities are. Each of these different communities has different priorities. Some of them have a stronger residential tax base as opposed to a commercial tax base. So if we're trying to bring in some policy that limits residential development, there are going to be communities that put the kibosh on that right away. And for us, we have to have a lot of that history. I have to look to my staff who have that, 10, 15 years institutional knowledge, who have seen also the changes in leadership in those communities over the years, and recognizing that that too can be a little dynamic, and you may have different players in different positions after an election period. So there's often a lot to juggle. I will give a quick plug for the PMA course, which I've taken, the Public Management Academy. Dr. Madden, in one of our recent ones, referenced being kind of a Jedi, and you have to, almost do some mind tricks to know what are important for people so that you can be proactive in how you approach whatever thing you're trying to get done.
Thank you both very much. Okay, I'm going to ask a question that came from Courtney. Courtney asks, this can be an answer that any of you can feel free to jump into. If you had to pick one particular skill to recommend for students to cultivate while in school, what would it be?
Curiosity. Be curious. Don't read just your assignment. Go beyond the assignment. If there's something within the assignment that also interests you, look at that. You can never have, well, maybe you can have too much knowledge, but generally not. So be curious. Getting back to what Dave said earlier about getting your hands on everything that you can and reading it.
I'm just thinking through, I guess, another thing that's just been drilled into me for decades is your ability to communicate. And I think that's something you have readily available, multiple opportunities to participate in school. But your ability to write and speak publicly, clearly and concisely, I will say, is I think is of just paramount importance. I could think of just numerous instances, especially entry-level positions and even lower and mid-level management or something, that you may not have an opportunity to engage face-to-face with someone who is making a decision on something, but more than likely your written products that make it to that person, whether it's even searching for a job, your cover letter and your resume, and then later on, just from my perspective as a planner, a white paper or information papers or a decision paper, a study, anything that that has your name on it, that you wrote, it represents you and is the only opportunity that person may have, and they will form an impression on you based on that. And so written communication is critical. And it's just something you have to continually work on all the time, and get your boss and other people to help you kind of become a better writer. And I know there's writing centers and stuff. I know it at Cleveland State that can kind of help you with that, but I can't say how important that is in terms of just your development and your ability to speak clearly and concisely. So.
And I will reiterate both of those. To Jim's point on curiosity, I would say ask questions. I sometimes am the annoying person in a room because, or even I found when I was in school, I was always the one raising my hand. But again, if it's something that you're interested in, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. Ask your supervisor questions. That is how you learn. I would much rather one of my staff come to me and ask a question ahead of time than deliver a product to me that wasn't the thing that maybe I wasn't clear about the expectations. So asking those questions, and then building off of Dave's point of communication, I would say also working on your emotional intelligence is another big one. And some of that is not only skills that are going to be really relevant in your job place, but I have found help me in my personal life as well. I have found that when there is a topic that is really difficult, something that gets me really fired up or angry or even maybe emotional where I might end up in tears, I have to take a minute. I will actually avoid that situation for a little while so I can take some time to process, how do I feel about it? What is the other person's perspective? What if I was in their shoes? What might they say or how might they respond? You could be at risk of overthinking things, but I have found taking that extra beat and just making sure you know why you feel the way you do about a certain issue is something that has kept me a lot more level-headed as a leader over the years. And it's still, still a skill I need to keep building on to just be a good person.
Thank you all. I think the writing thing and reading and public speaking, we all can definitely get that experience, and the emotional intelligence is something that only comes with time, as you did say. So I like all those things for us. Another question that we have is, when choosing an organization to work for, what should I be looking for in their culture and leadership? And this is for everyone.
Oof, I'll take a first crack unless you really want to, Jim, but I think hopefully your answer will be a little better than mine. My response immediately is it depends. And I think it goes back to some of the things that we had shared from the beginning of, you got to know yourself first, and what are some of those important things to you that are going to make it a enjoyable work experience. I would say, look at any of your current experience. What are the things that you like and don't like? Are there toxic coworkers? Now, you can Google questions to ask in an interview that help you suss that out and determine, a little bit about the culture in an organization. But I think it's important for you to know, what are those things that you really like or hate about any roles that you've already found yourself in, even in school or even in your, family interactions, those kinds of things. And then, if you don't have a super tactful way to ask it in an interview, do some quick Googling and you can find, probably loads of information of how to ask questions in an interview to make sure you're finding the job that's the right fit for you.
It's a small town, really. It's a big town, but it's really a small town. And you probably can ask questions of people who either worked with that agency or people, that work there. That's a tough one. I love working at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. A lot of dedicated people really care about the environment and protecting land. But one thing I learned is, when you work in an agency like that a lot of really specialists, people who are multiple degrees, people who have PhDs and master's degrees, and you get a lot of really smart people working in an environment, I find that sometimes conflict is inevitable, right? Because everybody has their own ideas about how things work. Everybody wants to be a chief, but everybody can't be a boss, except you, Dave, right? Everybody can't be the leader. And how agencies work with those relationships and kind of bringing people together and making those relationships work is really critical. And that requires some research and asking a lot of questions. And like I said, it's a big town, but it really isn't. And if you really want to find out what's going on in a place, you can find out.
Yeah, I echo, I think as said, that having those contacts and that network to reach out and hopefully know someone, either in a adjacent organization, the same field, or especially in that organization. I think one of the things I did kind of consciously when I was getting ready to move here, as Kristin mentioned, informational interviews are key. And it's not just about, learning what that person does or whatever, but I think I would consciously reach out and try to schedule them to meet them in their work environment, just so that you can kind of see what, what their office is like, or, just from your experience, from walking in the door to meeting with the person and talking with them. Internship, I'm sure internships, you're knee deep in internships. That's a great opportunity to kind of see the good, the bad, and the ugly of organizations. And it was touched on again in job interviews. I think you often approach a job interview as like a one-way conversation, and it can be a two-way conversation where those things that are important to you, you're like, what was the last, conflict? Like Jim mentioned, like, how was the last, maybe personnel conflict resolved in your department or whatever. Those types of things are important to kind of feel those out, because you especially when you're taking a job, you want it to be a good match for your character, your personality, your character. You want to fit And, you know, an organization should want you to fit too. Because the last thing you want to do is walk in, you know, on the second week and be like, oh man, I don't want to be here. Like, I think, and it's, believe me, it's happened here. Since I've been here once already, where we just, you know, we had hired somebody, just wasn't a great fit. And so then you're stuck kind of trying to unfold that over time and resolve those issues. And sometimes they're very difficult to resolve, as Jim could probably attest to.
And I'll just quickly add to that. I have found as an employer, when I am interviewing candidates and they are asking those kinds of questions, it shows me that we're likely going to have a better relationship, because you want to make sure that it's a good fit as well. And just, you know, I'm likely interviewing many people. So it helps set some of those candidates apart a little, to know that they also recognize their value and that they want to make sure they're putting themselves at an organization they're happy with. Because we also, as employers, don't want you leaving after 2 weeks. Please, I just want to reiterate that. And then going back to what Jim said, we also stay in touch amongst ourselves. So if I have somebody that has ghosted me after I've maybe went to make an offer, or we're trying to get something set up, I will never forget that. I just want to be clear. I will never forget that. And even if I run into you 10 years from now, and you may be in a completely different role, there may be a chance that somebody's asking me down the line, hey, what do you think about this person? And I will not hesitate to share the experience that I had. So I want to be clear. I know that this is a very heavy employee market right now, but as employers, we are also people who talk amongst ourselves. So I just want to share that.
All
Well, I only have positive things to say about you, Kristin.
Well, Jim, let me tell you about this great opportunity that we've got available.
Yeah, right. Okay.
All right, just a couple more Q&A questions. If anyone has anything else, feel free to drop them in. We do have a little bit of time here, but I will go ahead and ask one. Here's a fun one. This one can be for everybody. What do you find most fulfilling about your job?
I'll be quick. What I have found most fulfilling about what I've been doing the past several years is, like I said, setting up these land bank networks. And most fulfilling is been able to find the money to fund the mission. So we received about 75 million from Mike DeWine back in 75 through a legal settlement that we went after. Not a lot of people did. We did. It was called the robo-signing settlement. And there was some matching money. We went to the federal government with the help of Sherrod Brown's office and Portman's office. And we broke off 2 big chunks of federal money. But our biggest coup, because we had built this network, was to have $500 million put into the budget on June 30th of 2021, 150 for demo and 350 for brownfield. And you know what? You can have the greatest mission in the world, but if you don't have the money to achieve the ends, it's tough. But when you have a mission and you have the resources to help accomplish that mission, it's gold. There's no better feeling than that.
There's, I guess, 2 things. I recognize the difference. There's differences in the municipal levels in terms of planning and working. You know, the city of Cleveland and their staff is much larger than, like, say, Lakewood, with our staff of 6 and 7 here in planning development, and our connection to the residents is a little bit closer, as you see that in different levels. I think one of the things that, you know, if I'm able to, and it's just, it doesn't matter what it is or how big or small it is, if you're able to solve a problem for someone in that kind of that one-on-one interaction, and even if it's over a period, you know, it could be answering a simple question and providing them information that helps them out. It could be something, and we've had these where it's an ongoing issue for a year, 2 years, and you're finally able to wrestle it to the ground and get First Energy or whoever it is to do something that they're responsible to do. And then it happens and it actually results in action. Those types of things those are the things that I think that are they're truly rewarding. And the only other thing, you know, specific to planning, is if you are convinced, you know, based on gut experience, knowledge, all those things, that in terms of something in the right direction to move on a specific issue or problem, and you're able to positively influence leadership, whether it's the mayor and council or whatever, to get to a result that results in a decision or action, that's something else. Just it's professionally fulfilling in terms of an organization of the city, and you feel like you're keeping the city moving in the right direction and you're helping a resident with a problem, no matter how small it is. So I think those are kind of the two tangible things, at my level, at least on like a smaller municipal government.
I definitely echo what Jim and Dave had to say. And I think for me, going back to what we had mentioned before, and I think Dave had kind of highlighted this, especially in the public sector, there are many times that days aren't great. I remember often at the city, I had to kind of chant to myself, we're doing good work for the city. We're doing good work for the city. And the stuff that I was doing was not stuff that I was trained to do, navigating our city's financial system and making sure stuff went to Board of Control on time. Like that wasn't stuff I went to school for by any means, but I know that that's part of the process and that's how we get to that end goal. So for me, my fulfillment has come in little fits and spurts here and there. It'll just be a time that I'm talking with someone and I get a feeling of like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I am with a bunch of other like-minded people that are trying to make this community better. And at the end of the day, I think if all of us were working that way, we would find ourselves in a much more harmonious world. We're not there yet. I hope that, the folks that I'm presenting here with, Michele, Brittany, our attendees, that you also have a similar mindset, and those tough days, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that you are going to get some things done. They may take longer than you had originally planned or than maybe they should, but they will be, you'll see them come to fruition. And then, I get to see my work in action. When I would go around, if I see a rain barrel in somebody's house or in somebody's backyard in the city of Cleveland, I did the summer rain barrel program for as long as I was at the city. I know I helped with that. And just to see your work in action is really huge. And, I think all three of us have worked so that's a sell for the public sector right there. You get to see your stuff happen. So yes, I'll stop there. Sorry, now I'm starting to ramble.
No, I don't think it's rambling at all. The funniest thing is that someone is going to ask the question that I have next that I'm trying to ask you that is close to exactly what you were just touching on, Kristin. It's what Felicia would like to know is, as being her first time as a public servant, how do you keep that curve, that appetite going for innovation and efficiency, even in being effective in your job, when truly the people that maybe you're helping, like residents, are actually the ones suffering from that red tape, that border that they cannot get past? So how do you still keep that motivation? You touched on it a little bit, but all of you guys, if you can answer that, this will be our last question for the session.
Well, I can say that chanting "we're doing good stuff for the city" helps you in the moment, but it definitely doesn't solve those issues. The biggest thing I can say is look for those little wins and make sure you're celebrating your accomplishments. One of the things that I loved the most about the Sustainable Cleveland Initiative and those summits that I mentioned is that we used what's called appreciative inquiry. And that's a facilitation model that, we could spend all day talking about the problems that we see in our community. But what if instead we look at what's going well and how do we work off that and build off of it? So I would say try to find those wins. Make sure you're celebrating the accomplishments, because you're going to have some setbacks and unfortunately some residents are going to suffer. But if you can do one little thing or even just connect them with a resource that's going to help move them along the pathway to get their issue solved, you're contributing to the whole and doing what we're asked to do as public servants.
So when I was a city councilman in Cleveland for too long, 19 years, I tried to calculate once how many phone calls I answered. I answered about 30 a day, do that weekly, that's 200 a week, 800 a month, about 10,000 a year times 19, go figure. I had an assistant for a lot of that. So let's assume I took 100,000 phone calls. The people I appreciated most in government, and I can still tell you who they are to this day, and I've memorized their numbers, were people that I could call on to do what needed to be done. The guy in the health department in McCafferty, Frank Novak, 651-1010, when I called him and said, the yard over on West 44th is filled with dog, you know what, get an inspector out, and he'd do it. or a guy named John Gallagher, I'd call and say, John, there's a sidewalk on Denison that's really bad. There were certain people I relied on, and they cared about their job, and they made a difference. And the sad thing for me was, between the time I entered city council and left, I felt that slowly, that kind of commitment began to, I won't say disappear, but dissipate. And one of the things I'm telling people in the new county government now is they have to find a way to restore service, public service, customer service in the office of the Treasury, where if you picked up the phone and called and had a problem, somebody was at the other end. That doesn't happen anymore. So bills come out late, nobody answers your phone call, and not surprisingly, delinquencies have gone through the roof. So you should know that if you're one of those people and you're doing your job, you are making a difference, and more than you know. So don't lose the faith.
Yeah, I was just gonna offer a thought on that. So especially at that, you need people to be pushing innovation and efficiency and those types of things. Otherwise things like the Landbank would have never happened. Like, because there's always going to be people telling that this is the way we've done it for 50 years, or that's not something we should get involved in. So you don't need to, I wouldn't say be careful about curbing enthusiasm for that, because especially, you need that in terms of the broad perspective ideas that come into a department or an organization or development. You need that spectrum. You need kind of that, because, and luckily here in Lakewood, we share all those things, but we also don't necessarily want for perspectives. People generally offer them all day, every day to us. And so the one thing that I'll offer, that kind of the flip side of that coin that you have to manage in terms of municipal government, is that public good. There's 50,000 people out there. You're probably going to hear from, you're going to hear from the same 10 every day, all the time. But you have an obligation, sitting in planning development, to kind of balance all those perspectives. And you can't let, I guess, decisions and actions have to be grounded in reality and realism. And so, but you can't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. And where good enough falls on that scale is dependent on the situation, or, and I'll use bike infrastructure as an example. It's one of the things that I work on. And I work with a lot of advocacy groups from Bike Cleveland, Bike Lakewood, and as well as businesses and residents that depend on parking. And holy smokes, parking is an issue everywhere. But in Lakewood, we got more cars than we do dwelling unit. And most dwelling units that were built 100 years ago don't have garages and driveways. So it's just a quick example of balancing priorities on there. The bike communities would love to have separate bike infrastructure, separated bike lanes, protected bike lanes everywhere. We need to redo all of our public rights of way and the streets and take away parking and all those types of things. And that's one side of the coin, and that's the optimal and the perfect, in the mind of that, of kind of the contemporary direction of bike infrastructure. But in balancing the public good and all those other perspectives and needs and uses that have to go into a public right of way, you have to find that good enough, that we can move forward with the majority of people, you can't make everybody happy, but that realistic good enough is what you kind of shoot for most of the time. But don't curb that enthusiasm for innovation and efficiency, because that you definitely need that keeps a government and an organization fluid in terms of its thinking, its understanding of problems and things, and its continual development. You don't want to become static and what we've always done. This is what we've always done. We're always going to do it.
And if I can just add to that, Dave, I think sometimes you have to also be okay settling for the good enough right now, because I think for me, I know I'm going to be in the public sector for a while, so I'm okay compromising for now. And guess what? I'm not going anywhere. So I'll just wait and I'll keep pushing till we can hopefully get there. And, I would hope that somebody like Dave stays in his role so that he can help see that vision of the, very successful and sustainable bike infrastructure in his community, but recognizing that there's steps to get there. So yes, stay stay enthused, please.
All great final thoughts. Thank you all so much. So we are right about at time. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Rob for closing remarks. But I did want to thank all of our panelists. We really appreciate you giving us your time and sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. I personally found it so rewarding and informative, and I know that it has been for our audience as well. So genuinely, thank you. And thank you to our audience for asking such fantastic questions. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Rob.
First of all, that was a fantastic conversation. I want to say to Brittany and to Michele, you're like two pros. I don't know if this is something that you are passionate about, or you do it behind the scenes or a second gig or something, but you are two pros at this. So congratulations. Thank you for leading a fantastic conversation. And to David, Kristin, and the Jim, I just want to say thank you for not only investing time with us throughout the whole program, but today, and also just kind of just very keeping an upbeat, lively, and I think really in-depth conversation. I think this is all valuable, like golden nuggets for all of us to take back to our work and as we move forward. And I think, when Dave was talking about reading and Jim was talking about exploring, I think the key is like absorbing all of this stuff. Pick up no matter where you're at, no matter who you're talking to, learn, grow, and just be like a sponge to kind of just in this stage of your life and career development, just kind of pick up these different pieces, because each one of those little bits of gold will help you, lead the way, and things will change over time. So again, on behalf of our team, thank you very much for everything you've done today. I want to say thank you to Alexandra and our team for putting all the stuff together behind the scenes and organizing great programming. Thanks again to everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe, enjoy school, and safe travels with the weather.